I would like to invite all the participants on stage. Can we spotlight them probably? Yes, just a minute, everyone.
I hope Dr. Jorge Humberto is here, right? Is he here?
But I'm unable to locate him in the participant list.
Sir, he might be taking some time. He mailed right now saying that he messed up the time a bit. So yeah, we have all the participants. Vikas, sir, please could you spotlight them? I'm unable to do so.
Luis is also there. I saw him.
We can spotlight someone only when their cameras are on. Yeah.
Luca is also there, I believe. Pep is here.
Yes, hello.
Luca, you're here, right? Ah, right. Yeah.
I'm here.
That's great.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. So, Charu, you can begin. We'll start with the power.
So thank you everyone for joining us here for this next set of presentations that we are eagerly looking forward to. It is day 2 of the International Conference on Philosophical Counseling, which is sponsored by ICPR, Indian Council of Philosophical Research, and organized by the Department of Philosophy, Delhi University, and Department of Education, Delhi University. We have a lovely panel waiting for us, and we have 4 very eminent scholars as well as practitioners who are going to share a little bit more about their practice with us today. So a couple of housekeeping instructions for everyone. Please ensure that you are on mute throughout the presentations. Any questions that you have, you may send us on chat. And at the end of all the presentations, we have a question and answer session. If you do wish to ask your question in, on video, you can again do that at the end of all the presentations. Apart from that, yes, please just sit back and enjoy. So the first presentation that we have will be by Katerina Apostolides, who's a PhD candidate, a philosophical counselor and founder of Eudaimon counseling. She's going to be talking about metaphors and a method to further an individual's quest for meaningful living. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Charu. And I'm very glad for everyone who was able to join the meeting today and the conference this weekend. And I'm especially pleased to be talking about methods, which is the subject and the focus area for today, because I believe that the #1 thing that this field needs right now is the development of very concrete techniques and methods that can warrant the description of philosophical counseling. I think especially because so many of us nowadays are already exposed in some way to the typical psychotherapeutic approach to counseling and its various forms, it's all the more important that we become very clear on what it is that separates the thing that we do from these other things that we're familiar with, because otherwise we run the risk of unwittingly practicing something that's more akin to that. Okay, at the same time, because what we do is philosophy, we tend as people not to want to be confined and defined in very prescriptive ways. And we like to always think outside of the box, even if it's a box that we've designed. And I think that that is also a healthy and good thing. So what I'm going to suggest before actually presenting the techniques that are central to my practice, and which I want to suggest to anyone who's looking for some techniques to start with, is to offer 2 metaphors, which I think get at the spirit and the essence of philosophical counseling. And I want to suggest that on the basis of these metaphors, which give us an image of what we do, oh shoot, now I'm only staring at myself. Everyone else left. Okay, so on the basis of these images, we can reevaluate the techniques and the method that we employ. Okay, so and we can evolve them organically if need be. So I'll start with these images or these metaphors, and then I will proceed to talking about the actual techniques. So there are two metaphors, and they're both taken from Plato's Socrates. One of them has already become popular in the field of philosophical counseling, owing to the work of Pierre Grimes and Regina Juliana. And that is the metaphor of the philosopher as a kind of midwife. It's based on Socrates in the Theaetetus dialogue, describing himself as a midwife who helps other people to deliver themselves of certain truths. I have a PowerPoint, and I'll try to go back and forth between this and you seeing me and you seeing the PowerPoint. So here it is. Okay. So there are two reasons why I think this metaphor is especially valuable. One of them is that it implies that what we do when we practice philosophical counseling is that we help other people to birth truths that are already contained inside them. So our role as a philosophical counselor is not to be didactic or to, hand other people the wisdom that we already have. But it's more to help them realize that truth is already contained inside them in some way. And so our process is a facilitative one. We help them to deliver themselves of these beautiful, meaningful truths. The second reason I really like this metaphor is because it explains the role of discomfort and of pain in the process, not only of philosophical counseling, but of living. Life is always very uncomfortable and creates pain in various forms. But what Socrates says in this dialogue is that these pains are actually labor pains, like akin to a woman who's about to deliver something. The fact that she's in pain means that the delivery is actually in progress. So I find this enormously valuable because it suggests that when a person experiences discomfort, that is a sign of something healthy going on. It is not just a problem to be sort of healed away. Okay, so that's one metaphor. The second metaphor is also taken from Plato's Socrates and is actually based on a real life event that occurred, which was that Socrates was put on trial by the city of Athens. The essential charge, which is not how it was officially worded, was that he was a free thinker and that this was a problem for the city of Athens. And he was, of course, as many people know, sentenced to death by a slim margin, actually. But what's interesting is that at his trial, in addition to giving an account of his life and why he has lived the specific life that he led, he also explains why he's not going to beg for mercy from his jurors, because it seems to have been a practice at the time that what people would do when they were on trial would be to beg for the mercy of their jurors, and even to bring other family members to beg on their behalf. And what Socrates says is that the reason why he doesn't do this is because he's actually not convinced that death is something to be feared. And one of the things he says at his trial, I'll share my screen again, okay, is that from his perspective, the far greater danger is not of what other people can do to you or of what your body might suffer, but rather of you being unfaithful and untrue to your own soul. So to be untruthful or to be unjust is a far greater risk to a person than to be harmed by other people. Okay, so the greatest threats are not how other people treat you, but how you maintain yourself and maintain your integrity and your wholeness, whether or not you're able to maintain your integrity and your wholeness in the face of the various trials that you suffer. And so what I like to say is that in philosophical counseling, what we do both literally and metaphorically is that we help people not to be in fear of death, because they understand that being true to themselves is the only important thing. Okay, so I want to say that with these metaphors in mind, we can evaluate any of the techniques that I'm going to share, or any of the techniques we can, continue to create. But it's by having these images in mind for what we're after that we can maintain some sense of what we're oriented towards. Having said that, I'd like to move to offering 7 central techniques in my own practice, which I want to suggest are all specifically philosophical techniques, and that by using these, we can help ensure that what we do warrants the term philosophical counseling, and honors that term. So the first one is to ask clarifying questions. So anytime a counselee presents a certain issue, usually their presentation of the issue is subject to more than one interpretation. And I think that as our job, that part of our job as the counselor is to encourage a lot of precision and rigor, not only in their description of what the issue is, but in our ability to precisely understand it. So often a huge part of what I do is say something like, you said X. Now by X, do you mean this version of X, X1, or do you mean this version of X, X2, or do you mean something else? And I believe that this already makes what we do more philosophical, because it emphasizes the extreme importance of clarity as an intellectual value. And so what we do is not just nod empathetically when people tell us their issues, but we insist that clarity is a very important attribute whenever we're trying to think through things. Okay, so the second one, oh wait, I have an imaginary transcript, a conversation between a counselee and a counselor, and this continues the same one throughout all of the techniques that I offer. So the counselee says, "It worries me that I don't think I have real friends anymore. I spend most weekends and vacations by myself. I've begun to think that I am a social failure." Counselor, is your main worry that of being lonely and of not having a fun time on your weekends and vacations because there's no one to do things with? Or is it that not having friends may mean that there's something wrong with you as a person? Okay. The second technique is called noticing and observing. So I believe it's really important in philosophical counseling that as counselors, we tell the counselees what strikes us in the story that they've told. This doesn't mean that we're coming from a higher vantage point. It doesn't even mean that we're necessarily offering any wisdom when we say that. But by telling them what sticks out to us or what made an impression on us, what we're evidencing or illuminating is that we are a different person from them. I think this already makes what we do more philosophical, because in philosophy, we believe in the utmost importance of people coming together from different standpoints, and it is exactly the conversation that can occur between people from different standpoints that enables the search for truth and for wisdom. So back to the screen. So the counselee says, "I get lonely occasionally, but mostly I worry that my difficulty in building friendships proves that I am unsociable." Counselor, "I find it interesting that you don't get very lonely when you spend so much time by yourself. It occurs to me that you probably enjoy being on your own more than most people." So this is merely the practice of saying something that you find interesting. So it's a simple technique, but it serves a philosophical purpose. Okay, the next one is called reflecting values back. So this is based on an exercise that's called reflective listening, which is already used in both psychotherapy in some forms, but also in conflict resolution. The way that reflective listening is usually exercised is that one person gives an account of their experience, and then another person, in order to show that they've heard their account, will repeat back to them, usually word for word, what they've said. And what's interesting about this is that even this word for word replay can actually be a very powerful technique and make a person feel very understood. But in our case, where what we're doing is philosophical counseling, I believe the best way to practice this is to reflect back to someone what they've just said, but to put what they've said in a slightly more philosophical vocabulary. So, and by a philosophical vocabulary, what I mean is that you try to highlight the values that are at play in the issue that they're presenting. And usually there's a struggle between some competing values. So you try to highlight what that value struggle might be. So in the example, what I have is, counselee says, well, I like thinking about philosophy and journaling, which I can't really do around other people anyway. But sometimes it feels that the more time I spend in my own thoughts, the more alien everything else becomes to me. I stop being able to understand why people get excited about rock concerts or baseball games or even politics. And often I won't even know what they're talking about. Counselor, it sounds like you are torn between, on the one hand, wanting to develop a stronger relationship with yourself, to explore your own beliefs and experiences and increase your self-knowledge, and on the other hand, wanting to have an active social existence, to share the same cultural interests with others. And you think you cannot have both of these at the same time. Is that correct? Counselee says, yes. Whenever you reflect something back, it's always really important to ask if you were correct in the way that you reflected that back. Okay. Now, the fourth technique is called asking fear-facing questions. So I really believe that one of the most important things that we can do in counseling is to encourage a person to be honest about the real fear that they're experiencing. Because often what people do is they talk around their fear, but they avoid fully naming it. And I find that in conversations between friends, often what happens is that even the other friend will not encourage them to name it because they want to, act like it doesn't really exist. But in philosophical counseling, what we believe in is the pursuit of truth and of consciousness about ourselves. And so it's important to actually name what our fears are. And I also believe that what makes this really philosophical is that once a person names their fear, then they realize that the most important thing is not something that can happen to them, or even a fact that may or may not be true. The most important thing is how they maintain themselves and their own integrity and wholeness in the face of that possible reality or fact. And this gets back to Socrates and his understanding that it's how faithful he is to himself and his own sense of truth that matters more so than anything that can be external to him. Okay, so in the example that I have, the counselor says, you mentioned that you are afraid that not having friends shows you are unsociable. Do you think it is true that you are unsociable? Counselee, I have started resenting people who are more at home in everyday culture. In that way, yes. So the counselee here stares, into the fact that he or she may be unsociable in some ways. And by staring into that, you learn to reconcile yourself with any possible reality, because it's the spirit of truth that you bring to that reality that is ultimately more important. The fifth technique is called asking open questions. And this is usually I've offered these techniques in the kind of order that I believe that they naturally occur, although of course it's not a strict order. The exercise of asking open questions is usually on the rebuilding side. So what's come before is more in the form of venting, and this is more in the form of rebuilding. So the open questions is when someone has already sort of suggested some value that they have, what you do is you ask them to spell out what they mean by a certain value, to imagine what it would be like to live in a world where that value was dominant. And I believe that once people are able to spell that out, then on both a conscious and an unconscious level, they start orienting themselves towards that value because they have an image of it that's alive in their mind. So in the example in the conversation, the counselor says, what is the most meaningful way that you could imagine relating to other people as the person you are? Counselee, I guess I would like to be able to share the things I think about with more people. Questions like whether we should judge our lives based on what we achieve externally or not. I'd like to hear what other people think about that. But most people are too busy with other things to stop and have that conversation. Okay. Next technique is called sharing experiences. Now, I believe that sharing experiences of our own as counselors is one of the most important things that we can do in a counseling relationship. As someone who has been through therapy in the past, I can say that I have never been able to stay very long with a therapist who did not feel comfortable sharing their own, opening up about themselves to me. In some cases, I can even say it was damaging when I felt that the person did not trust me with even the basic information that they would share with someone at a cocktail party. But what is it that makes sharing of experiences specifically philosophical? For me, it gets back once again to the fact that in philosophy, what we believe in is the meeting of two separate people, and that somehow it's exactly the fact that it's not just one person's subjectivity, but there's a multiplicity of subjectivities involved that enables people to also see the objectivity of a certain situation. And I would add that that when you share your experiences, that also makes any empathy you show more real to the other person, because they understand where you're really coming from. So in the example, what I offer is this. Counselor, I can identify with what you shared earlier about resenting people who feel that they belong in everyday culture. I came to the US as an immigrant, and it took me a long time to understand most of the pop cultural references people would use. And even now, I don't really bother keeping up with all of it because I don't have space in my head for so much information. But at least I care less now. Counselee, thank you for sharing. Yes, then you probably know what I mean. I also want to add about this that exactly because in philosophical counseling, we're working with certain people who are more sort of, can be relied upon to be more rationally in command of themselves, I think we have more leeway to share our experiences because we know that the other person is going to be able to handle that information in a good way, in a responsible way. Okay, the final one is called discerning the essential issue. So whenever someone opens up about a certain problem, usually that problem is a more kind of circumstantial problem, but underlying it is often a philosophical query, which they may or may not be fully aware of. And I believe that one of our, a big part of our role as counselors is to help to highlight what we believe is the real philosophical query that underlies the thing that, the more circumstantial problem that's coming up for them. Okay, so, our strength as philosophical counselors shows itself both in how well we're able to intuit what this real issue is, and secondly, how meaningfully we're able to engage with the clients in seeking a resolution of that query. Okay, so an example I provide, the counselor says, to me, it seems that it would be worth focusing on the question you raised about whether to judge your life based on things achieved externally or not. I have the sense that answering that question will put us in a better position to judge whether it is all right to be quote unquote unsociable or to be disconnected from others. Counselee, I would like to have that conversation. So what I say as well in the paper that I wrote about all this is that after you reach this technique, you can easily enter the whole cycle all over again. And I really think that to the extent that these techniques form a kind of order, you're able to repeat this order multiple times. Okay, with that, I just want to say that I'm very pleased and honored to have been able to present today. And I look forward to hearing questions from all of you and to listening to the other insights that people will bring today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful and insightful presentation. Let me just go back to telling everyone a little bit more about Katerina. She holds a master's degree. She's a candidate for PhD in the field of political philosophy at the Political Science Department of the University of Chicago. She's worked as a philosophical counselor and as a professional conflict mediator in New York City and Athens, Greece, where she's currently based. She's the co-founder of Philosophical Counselors Connect, an online professional development group for philosophical counselors around the world to be able to trade ideas and insights. And she also runs a weekly discussion group in Athens that is titled Exploring Honesty, Practicing Philosophy. Your group of Philosophers Connect has really actually brought a lot of people together, and you've been such a rallying force for this movement as a whole. So thank you so much. With regards to the presentation, yes, we are receiving some questions, but I'll save all of that for the end of the presentations. Thank you so much. We'll move on to our next speaker. Everyone, I would like to take this opportunity to invite our next speaker on board, Dr. Luca Nave. We can probably spotlight Nave.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Doctor. Dr. Luca Nave is a doctor of philosophy, specialist in philosophical practices and in clinical bioethics. He's the president of Pragma Philosophical Practice Professional Society and director of the School of High Professional Specialization in Philosophical Practices, Pragma Milan. He's the director of Spazio Filosofante, philosophical consultancy firm and training agency in philosophical practices, professor of clinical bioethics at the Masters in Rare Diseases and Complex Pediatric Diseases Department of Clinical and Biological Sciences, University of Turin. He's the coordinator of consultancy activities and formation of the Federation of Rare Infantile Diseases and A-Rare, Forum Association of Rare Diseases of Piedmont and Valle de Aosta. He collaborates with organizations, universities, and companies with consultancy and training activities throughout the national territory. A warm welcome to you, Dr. Nave. Please, over to you. We are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. I try to share my slide. Okay, my report aims to present the work of a philosophical counselor in a hospital setting. I will refer to my experiences in this area, since I have worked for 15 years now within a network of healthcare facilities and professionals in two hospitals here in Turin, in Italy, Children's Unite and Adults Unite, that dealing with rare and complex disease. In general, in this area, the philosopher or philosophical counselor deals with three main activities. The first one, managing a philosophical listening space for patient, family members, and healthcare professionals. The second, attending the meeting of medical and nursing team of the hospital ward to address the ethical and philosophical problems that arise in daily clinical practice. And in the end, organizing training sessions on philosophical practices, clinical bioethics, and philosophy of medicine, both in university and corporate setting. In my report, for reason of time, I will focus on the first point. So the philosophical counseling is helping relationship for patients, family members, and healthcare professionals. The objective is to analyze what tools are the counselors or philosophical counselor, and how the counselor differentiate themselves from the clinical psychologist and psychotherapist. Before analyzing this activity, it is necessary to understand the scenario or the situation in which philosophical counseling is integrated. As Karl Jaspers writes, and Karl Jaspers is a very important philosopher for philosophical counseling, every philosophy and every philosophizing are always born within a specific situation. Even when I ask myself the fundamental questions of metaphysics, who I am, for example, what is the meaning of being and what happens, I'm not asking myself abstract questions, but I am starting from a certain situation in which I'm caught up. So the scenario or the existential situation in which the philosopher who works in hospital must face is biotechnomedicine, understood as the supreme outcome of the development process of contemporary biological and organic medicine, which took place thanks to the encounter between experimental science, technique, and technology. This is the scenario I found when I started working in the hospital. The situation with a philosopher who works in hospital is biotechnomedicine. The dominant idea in this situation holds that medicine is a science which is based on as many hard science like biology, chemistry, or statistics, think to the evidence-based medicine, for example, and which deals with concrete facts and real and tangible problems, while philosophy would be an abstract discipline that produces form of knowledge that are unless in deal with problems that doctors and patients experience in their daily life. Now, on one hand, it's true that medicine is a science and that it uses scientific methodologies to solve concrete problems. But it's as well true that there is a part of philosophy that sounds rather abstract. I think to the books of Wittgenstein, for example, or Heidegger, there is a part of philosophy that real abstract, but philosophy and medicine are not just that. Indeed, in the most recent evolution of biotechnomedicine, a lot of serious problems arise that cannot be solved only by science, technique, and technologies, because they are ethical and philosophical questions that born in biotechnomedicine. In particular, I refer to ethical issues that arise at the beginning of life. I think, for example, at the question of abortion or in vitro fertilization, clinical trials, etc. And at the end of the human life, for example, euthanasia, for example, the living will or the assisted suicide, or in the process of personal care. The second one is a big problem between the doctor and patients, problems between medical benefit or beneficence and patient's autonomy. So the conflict between beneficence and patient's autonomy, and in the end, the problem of communication and relationships problems that arise between the medical nursing team, patients, and family members, or the members of patients association. All these problems arise in biotechnomedicine, but cannot be solved only by science, technique, and technology. In the department where I work, there is full awareness that these are complex problems and only our interdisciplinary look can address and solve them based on the specific knowledge and skills of the various members who make up the team, which, in addition to the nursing and medical staff, include a psychologist, an anthropologist who deals with intercultural medicine, and a philosophical counselor. So let's see what problems the philosophical counselor usually faces with patients and family members. My work generally begins with the communication of the diagnosis by the doctor. Receiving the news of being affected by a rare and unknown disease, which does not require therapeutic protocols. So with rare disease, there isn't evidence-based medicine and specific therapeutic protocol, and which is treated with that are called orphan drugs that pharmaceutical companies don't produce, has a devastating effect on the patient's health in bio, psycho, and social terms. The most common question that patients ask to the philosophical counseling is, why me? What I have done wrong to deserve this? What is the sense of the situation in which I have been thrown? This question can take various formulations and are reminiscent of the question of theodicity and a metaphysic in the biblical history of Job, to which I have dedicated the book Leave God Alone and Die, Job's Lament in the Time of Biotechnomedicine. These questions arise in medical context that they have psychological repercussion, but they are purely philosophical questions, are practical metaphysics questions. They are challenge for the philosophy and for philosophical practices. So, what does the philosopher answer? We can start. Let's start with what the philosopher counselor should never do in his job. The philosopher must not be a prophet or a sophos. Philosophy for ancient Greek philosophers is a search and not a possession of knowledge. So philosopher research the knowledge because it's not a possession. His task is not to convey certain ideas of true, good, just, and beautiful, to which the patient is asked to adhere to find answer to metaphysical questions. This is the work of a prophet, of a priest, of a religious advisor, which is effective in the current adherence to the worldview. It doesn't work if the patients take up an alternative worldview and need answers that cannot be found in prophetic knowledge and wisdom type treatment. I think we are convinced that we live in what Tristan Engelhardt defines as a society of moral foreigners. Our society and hospital in particular are populated by believers in many religions, by agnostic, by atheists, and by those who embrace a form of personal spirituality. Therefore, philosophical counseling can be maeutic, not prophetic. The philosopher's task is not to introduce in the mind of patients true, good, and just thoughts into the patients, but to extract the thoughts, beliefs, values, and manage the emotion arouses by the existential situation in which he is thrown. In the world of philosophical practice, and not only here, maeutic is often abused practice, art, or method. Using maeutics not only means giving birth to the thought of a gravid person, but in addition to giving birth, they take care of the fruit of delivery. Beyond the metaphor, maeutics include two phases. The first one, helping the delivery of thought, belief, values, prejudice, and bias extrapolated from the patient's world view. The second, analyzing and giving treatment to the thought generated by the patients using specific tools. Philosophical tools such as maeutic, clinical, creative, and caring thinking, argumentation, Sceptic epoche, and hermeneutic method that allow you to act on the patient's world of the view. This is real philosophical care. And so the second tools is phenomenological and existential counseling to act on the dynamic of communication and relationship and on the emotions that the situation arouses. The philosopher must work on the emotion because it's the emotional experiences that generates the disturbance and that must be treated in alternative way to the psychologist's one. Now, in the end, it's very difficult to make a comparison between the work of a philosopher and the work of the psychologist, because there are hundreds of paths in psychology and in psychoanalysis, so closer and other very distant from philosophical counseling. In this report, I have tried to show that philosophical counseling in its helping relationship uses purely philosophical tools and different from those present in a psychologist's toolbox. During 15 years of work in the hospital, I have worked with many psychologists and psychotherapists, and there has never been conflict among the specific individual competencies. Clinical practice makes this difference very, very evident. I think that those who talk too much about conflicts between philosophy and psychology, in Italy in particular, but not only here, are among the theorists of the philosophical counseling. That is, philosophers who build theory on philosopher works in a hospital or in a company or in prison, but have never had a hard food in one of these places and have never met the people who live there. They make perhaps good theory, which is pointless to those who want to work with philosophy as a philosophical practice, according to a very pragmatic perspective. So, thanks for your attention. I close this report with the last book that I wrote with Maddalena Bisolo, is AstraZeneca, the vaccine of philosophy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nave. That was a very interesting presentation and you made some very pertinent points. I'm sure everybody will have a lot of questions. So we'll save that for after all the presentations. Thank you so much, Dr. Nave.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now, Dr. Luis de Miranda. He lives in Stockholm Archipelago, Sweden, and is a philosophical practitioner and a researcher at Uppsala University, where he currently works on the theory and practice of philosophical health at the Center for Medical Humanities and Social Sciences. A PhD from the University of Edinburgh, he's an international author of nonfiction and fiction. Some of his books have been translated into dozens of languages, and his essays have been published by reputed presses around the world. We welcome you, Dr. Miranda, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here. The format will be a bit different because I would like to engage, if possible, in the form of dialogue. Also because when we talk about philosophical counseling and philosophical practice, I think it's important that people understand that it's not only about analytic intelligence. So when we make presentations in conferences as academics, we tend to use that discourse because it is our currency and it is important. But there is a dimension that is a dimension of dialectics, of which we have been talking in the last sessions and the last day. And I believe there is another dimension, which is a creolectic dimension. I will speak about it a bit. So I am copying here in the chat a few articles that explain what I mean by philosophical health, how I practice it in counseling, and also by creolectics. So this is to avoid having an analytic presentation. Please feel free to read the articles. They are often open access. The other thing that is important is that when we speak of philosophy, there is this assumption that it is an elitist practice. For example, I was at a conference last year and someone probably well-intentioned told me, oh yes, you are a philosophical counselor, but this is for the happy few. Think about India and how they are suffering now with COVID. And this kind of European or Occidental-centered cliches, right? That the people in so-called developing countries, they don't have time to think. They are worried with food and suffering. This is very annoying. And at the very same time where I had this remark, I was actually counseling, because I do most of my counseling online, with people who lived in India and who had people die in their family, and yet they felt vital to have a philosophical conversation, which of course I believe is a universal need in various forms. The other thing is, so I consider that we are, as counselors, practicing philosophical health. But I don't mean that in a normative way, in the sense that sometimes physical health or psychological health, which are also in the history of humanity relatively recent constructs, tend to become more and more normative. This is what you should eat. This is what the kind of exercise you should do to be healthy physically. This is what you should think to be healthy psychologically. And psychological health is itself more and more normative. It's interesting to see that schools like psychoanalysis, and I'm trained as a psychoanalyst myself, or cognitive behavioral therapy, they historically started with a philosophical insight. And over the decades, they become more and more normative, more and more embedded in the analytic scientific discourse. So here we have a little time of respiration, but I want to mention perhaps that in one article that is called The 5 Principles of Philosophical Health, I try to identify 5 core activities that we engage in a philosophical practice that are 5 aspects of what perhaps constitutes a state of philosophical health. And by the way, there is an intellectual history of that idea, if not that phrase itself. The idea of philosophical health is very present, of course, in the Greeks. Michel Foucault wrote a lot about it. And it comes back a little bit with Spinoza, and then with Nietzsche, who had this idea of the great health, of which we can talk about later. But according to me, the first element is there is some form of mental heroism. And this was also the idea of the Greeks, by the way, the Stoics, for example. Although I don't want to sound like I am an advocate of the Stoics, there are also critiques that we can address to them. For example, it's worth mentioning because the Stoics are very popular. When people discover philosophical practice, they often read some bestseller about the Stoics, and there is this idea that we should adapt, we should accept, we should endure. Well, in some cases, this might be true, but in other cases, no, we should actually co-create, fight, propose new forms of what we think is paradise on earth. So that there is a political dimension also, I think, in philosophical practice. So mental heroism is needed because, well, I don't know if this is a specificity of our world, but we are constantly bombarded with life options, lifestyles, ways to reach happiness, etc. And it seems to me that, and I often discuss that with people in consultation, that, well, if there is no coherence, consistency, some sort of repetition of what? Well, we will see with the second principle, an idea, an admiration, some core set of conceptual constellations that we decide is our direction. We end up never growing roots for ourselves. But heroism, because it's very difficult. We live in a world where the normative is extremely present, because we used to be in this village where 20 people told us what to think. That was really a strong pressure. But now we have 8 billion people telling us what to think. We are bombarded with forms of, so of course there is a diversity into that. So it's a dialectic there, right? Of course we discover new ways, but there's a lot of, it's not because you add more people that you have more diversity. We see that with COVID, for example. There's a lot of standardization of discourses. There's a lot of normativity. The second principle of philosophical health, I call deep orientation. And I already talked a bit about that, is the idea that and this actually is a term that is also used by Pierre Hadot, who with Foucault rediscovered the philosophical care dimension of philosophy since its origins. An orientation, a vision, a direction, some ideal that we tend to, and that we keep faithful to. The third principle, I'm going faster here because I promised a conversation. I realized that I'm talking already too much, but critical creativity. The fourth principle, deep listening, and this is very interesting, because we could say that all counseling practices share that feature of deep listening. And there is a little bit of research on that in musicology, for example. This is, of course, easier said than done. And it can be very irritating. We saw it in the last session with Brenefier. He sometimes was listening, and sometimes he was not listening. He was listening to himself. And if you assume that the person is saying something that he didn't say, you might miss something. There is this example. One day, an Indian, actually, she was Indian but living in Stockholm when I had my practice in real life, and she came to me and said, "I don't know why I'm here. Really, my life is fantastic. I'm so happy. I love plants. I love to look at plants, especially the leaves, the leaf, the shape of the leaves, the color of the leaves, the way leaves grow. Really, I could look at leaves forever." And I just asked her, "Is there someone you would like to leave?" And of course, she started crying. She said, "Yes, my husband." So this is a typical example that is not specific to philosophical counseling, right? But deep listening, I think, is a very important component. And the fifth principle is a relationship to what I call the creel, just the real with a big C, the C of creation. And in other words, infinite possibility, and not infinite possibility in the sense of neoliberalism, the choices we have, but rather possibility as potential, as way of thinking of the impossible in ways that are not culturally or socially formatted. So I think I will pause here, but just by giving two examples of practice that I have found myself in, where I have tried to apply these and other aspects of what I believe is philosophical health. And by the way, you can also check on the internet. There is a Philosophical Health International network that you are most welcome to join. It's an open network of conversation. And I've been working with two populations, one for several years and one I'm starting now. So the first one is the multinational company Vattenfall. It's a Swedish company that is present in several other countries that produce energy. And we conducted I started a philosophical health program there that started individually, right? So many counselors, we start individually with personal dialogues with top managers, strategic R&D. But after a while, I noticed that since I had several of them, I was getting some sort of an overview of the company. I was seeing things that perhaps they didn't see. And one of the things I was seeing is that most people in the company were very joyful about the fact that the company 5 years ago included fossil free in their horizon. So they are very close to achieve this sort of neutrality. But I told them, is that enough? Being neutral in our world of today, where we are actually living in extremist conditions, planetary thinking, planetary speaking. And this is important because I believe that planetary thinking, which is, by the way, a Heideggerian, I didn't think I would cite Heidegger, but here you go. Planetary thinking is very important today for philosophical health. So Vattenfall is now engaging in a transition to think, and we are doing that together, what's beyond fossil free? What would be a form of growth? Because let's face it, we all want to grow. I think it would be hypocritical for a company, but for any living being to say, I don't want any form of growth, whether spiritual, etc. Say, I want to stagnate, or I want to actually, could be an interesting form of thinking. Like, I want to reduce myself to an infinite point, but I think that would be a form of growth too. So how can we invent a form of growth today, planetary growth, that is healing, right? We have the model of growth that is expanding on someone else's territory, winners and losers. How can we have a form of growth that heals as the being growth? And this is connected with the second group with whom I'm working and this is very fresh. I'm starting now, but I've done a lot of preparatory research to understand this population that to be honest, I had no idea of how they live. It's people living with spinal cord injury. So this is a partnership I started with Linköping University Hospital in Sweden. And we're starting now to ask them, what's your philosophy of life? And why is that important? Well, because people who live with spinal cord injury, they are suddenly faced with a condition where there is no return to normal. They are either tetraplegic or paraplegic. They live in a wheelchair. Some parts of their body, they cannot even move anymore, but their mind is intact. And so they have to reinvent their life. And our hypothesis is, well, it is probable that some of them use philosophical strategies, which is different from psychological strategies in the sense that in healthcare, I work at the Center for Medical Humanities of Uppsala University. There's a lot of this idea of psychological health as being based on willpower. And I think that philosophical health is not about willpower. It's much more complex and nuanced. And so this is an interesting metaphor because I think that today people with spinal cord injury are not the only ones who live in extremist conditions without a possible return to normal. I think we all do. I think we have reached a stage of human civilization where we are all living in extremism. And so we can learn from people who actually know that they cannot return to normal. They have to reinvent a new form of life, while we tend to think that, well, okay, we will return to normal. Oh yes, now there is a crisis there, but in 3 months we will return to normal. So, and by the way, of course, since philosophy, I think shouldn't be normative, is it good? Is it desirable to return to normal? So I'll stop here. I realize that I have, I don't know, maybe talked for 20 minutes, 15 minutes, I don't know. But is there other questions, reactions, comments? Since I will unfortunately have to leave in 10 minutes, I'd be happy to share with you a little conversation if anyone wants to say something or ask something.
Everyone, you may kindly raise your hand if you wish to come on video and ask Dr. Miranda a question, or you can send it on chat, as he won't be available with us after this. He has to leave, unfortunately.
Yes, so we have Navneet, who raised a hand.
Yeah. Hello, Miranda. Yeah, I would like to hear a little bit more on contribution of Heideggerian phenomenology in philosophical counseling from your side.
Right. Specifically Heideggerian.
Yeah, if you like speaking.
Right. Well, what is interesting is the influence that Heideggerian phenomenology had in people who were working in care, like Ludwig Binswanger, for example.
Yes.
And since we don't have much time, I will only emphasize one aspect that I find extremely important, and that is in Heidegger, but also in Binswanger, and Erwin Strauss, who worked a very interesting book about the sense of sense. What is it to sense something? And it's the concept of possibilization. And I think this is important. This is actually connected to creolectives. So I promise to talk about creolexity. I believe that we have a more or less expandable domain of possibility. And again, this has nothing to do with choices of products that are there available in the supermarket of postmodernity. It has to do with our sense of what can we think from the idea of impossibility, for example, or what can I do with my life in a way that is articulated with some idea of attunement with the others. So yes, so if you're interested in that matter, I think for me the concept of possibilization in care is very interesting. Thank you for your question.
To authenticity, I guess. And will you connect
authenticity? Yes and no, because well, the idea of authenticity might also, for some people, resonate as an identity that is fixed. And this has both advantages and disadvantages, because what was authentic for me 10 years ago might not be what is authentic for me now. Of course, we can say, well, but the intention of authenticity is actually what is authenticity. We never reach, if you think like Socrates, we can say we never reach the sense of exactly who we are. I'm not even sure that's interesting. That's an interesting question. What is more interesting is what can I put on the table that are my horizon, and can I share it with the others?
Okay, thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe we still have, what, 5 minutes? Or am I done? No more.
No, not at all, Dr. Miranda. I mean,
Okay.
it's totally up to you.
Yeah,
Yes.
so anyone else would like to comment or ask a question? Right. So perhaps one thing that I can add here, since there's just a few minutes left, is that there is very often when people have this perception of personal growth, the concept of self-realization is very popular, right? And less people know that actually Maslow himself, at the end of his life, said, well, self-realization is actually necessarily not the ultimate stage. There is a stage that he called self-transcendence, where in fact we are less obsessed by, so this sort of prolongs the question about authenticity. We are less obsessed by the question, who am I? And more interested by the question, what am I doing? Like, what are we doing here in this conference? I think we are celebrating the fact that we believe that thinking is a joy, as Jennifer said, but also an activity that is as important as breathing. There is a Raya who raises his hand. I believe we have, I don't want to take time of the speaker after me, but we have perhaps 2 minutes.
I just wanted, thanks. I just wanted to pick up on that last remark that you made about self-transcendence. And I was thinking that maybe you'd be going somewhere else with it, not to what am I doing, but who are you, right? Who are you? Who's the other? Because the self, as Iris Murdoch says, one of my favorite quotes from her, is such a bedazzling object that we might look nowhere else once we look there. And but understanding the self without being able to see oneself through the eyes of the other seems also a very difficult thing to do. So I was wondering whether this self-transcendence is also other-directed, because that's often not so much in the focus. Thanks.
Which completely, thank you for that addition. And I think it's important to make that clear, that when I'm doing something, it's always in more or less harmonious attunement with the world and with others. So the doing is an engagement with the world. And so that the dimension of the other, which, by the way, so one of the articles that I refer to, think into the place of the other. I wrote other with a capital O, of course, because in order to avoid our obsession for humanity, we are very humanity obsessed, which sometimes is needed, but the other is all forms of being, but also the relation to the sublime, that what I call the creative other, the big other. Thanks. Thank you all. I suppose I have exhausted my time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Luis, for this interesting presentation, telling about your work mostly that you have been doing since a long time on philosophical health. In fact, friends, few months back, I think, few months back, I had come across this concept of philosophical health. And then I was like, we have been practicing philosophical counseling, which is a means, but a means to what? No, we only leave it at the level of well-being. a broader concept and then leave it there. But Lewis has come out with a clear-cut conceptualization of philosophical health and how to reach that, and how do you conceptualize philosophical practice, philosophical counseling itself in order to reach that philosophical health in terms of creolectives. That really attracted me. So thank you so much for that wonderful contribution, Lewis. Thank you. Thanks for being.
Thank you, Bala, and thank you
I
all.
understand that there is a medical emergency, so please, thank you. We'll move to the next presentation, Charu. Thank you.
Bye.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Miranda. Very sincere thanks from our end to him. He stayed a little bit past his time, although he had a medical emergency at his place. I would like to now invite our next speaker. Yes. Now we have a next speaker, Dr. José Barrientos-Rastrojo, who's a tenured professor of philosophy at University of Seville and the leader of several university research projects on philosophical practice. In fact, he created the first empirical research on philosophical practice in the world. And some of his projects have been funded by his university, others by the European Union and international universities such as the University of Chicago, etc. He has projects which train in philosophical skills to inmates in Latin American prisons in Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, Spain, and Brazil. And it has been asked to spread out in all the world, Turkey, Portugal, USA, Italy, and so on. Dr. Barrientos-Rastrojo is the leader of the Experiencialidad Research Group, as well as the director of FACER, International Journal on Philosophical Practice, after defending the first European dissertation on philosophical counseling in 2009. He has received the award Cooperation Acknowledgement in 2018 and the first International Award on Philosophy in Mexico in 2018 as well, the first International Award of Philosophy in Portugal in 2014, and the first National Award on Philosophy Le Figure del Pensiero in Italy in 2012. We are looking forward to hearing you, Professor. Please.
Thank you very much, Charu, for the presentation. And I am very pleased to Bala Ganapati for creating this conference and for inviting me to be here. So thank you very much. I'm going to share a presentation. A minute. Okay, I think that you can see it now. I am trying to make a presentation of about 20-25 minutes in order we can share some ideas after that. So I suppose that now you can see the slide that starts with Marta. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce my presentation with Marta, not her real name. She is a woman in her early 40s whose mother, Katerina, was dying in 2006 because of a cancer that has metastasized. Doctors said that she can survive several weeks before she passed away. One doctor of Katerina talked to Marta about my work on philosophical counseling. Marta, the daughter, came to my consultation in order I help her mother to find a purpose, a meaning of life before she died. She said that her mother has concluded that life was meaningless, and she was worried about that because initially, I suspect, but I was mistaken, she was a very religious person. I visited Katerina when she moves to the house of her daughter. Katerina expects to spend her last days with Marta. From the first session, I discovered that Katerina was a smart and very logical woman. She has accepted to meet me because the request of her daughter. However, she felt that she doesn't need any help. Katerina's discourse was very well constructed. She pointed out that her illness helped her to know that life is meaningless, despite her daughter was determined to convince her otherwise. Katerina adds, that some people can build a purpose, a meaning for their life, but she hasn't enough time now to do it. Therefore, she appreciated my assistance, but she considered that I was useless. I adore the ability of Katerina to use concepts to articulate reason and to defend her conclusion. Nevertheless, there was something hidden when she states, life is not worthwhile. It hasn't a purpose. That is a great conclusion since it vaccinates me against my nostalgia when I am going to lose, when I am going to die. Little by little, I discovered that the basis of her situation, Katerina doesn't want Katerina doesn't want that life has a meaning because that truth will cause her pain. The problem was that a reasonable lie, that lie was creating some problem in her life because Katerina knew that her reason has built a compassionate light that now was a prison for the last of her days. At the end, I understood that Marta didn't want me that I convince her mother about her position, that life has a meaning, but she wanted me to free her mother from the prison that her logic had produced in her. We were in 2006, as I was, and I was beginning to explore my experiential approach to philosophical practice. My previous approach was based on a logical, discourses, analytical, and conceptual reason. I knew that philosophical practice was not a profession that aims to give moral pieces of advice or to provide a safe place to arrive. By contrast, I knew that philosophical practice was a profession to open minds, and that was my challenge with my counseling. But my problem was that Katerina was oppressed by her logical reason. Here, the problem resides. How can I help her to open her mind? How a philosophical counselor can help people like Katerina to move outside of their ideas since they show a logical structure to avoid that change? And more important, do I need a new approach beyond an analytical and logical one to help Katerina to open her mind? If so, what kind of approach, a new reason did I need? Katerina, Katerina wasn't a turning point in my career as philosophical counselor. I recognized that the logic wasn't enough for philosophical practice with some counselors. In fact, any statement can be defended by means of logical reason. For example, Jonathan Swift, the author of Gulliver's Travels, wrote an ironic text in 18th century where he defended why we need to eat the meat of the poor children. A few of my counselors have shown a cognitive dissonance. A cognitive dissonance is the state of having inconsistent thoughts, beliefs, or attitudes, especially as relating to behavioral decision and attitude change. Taking into account this definition, I remember a counselor that said one day, Jose, Pepe, after our session, I have understood that the best option in my case is to stop my present behavior, but I feel that I cannot do it, and even I feel that there is something wrong if I do it. It seemed to me that my mind and my heart are traveling into two different countries. There are some ways to explain this cognitive dissonance. Let's explore a couple of them. Initially, we have to say that our behavior and feelings don't depend just on ideas. Radhakrishnan considered that there are transcendental realities beyond the human reason, as Luis Miranda said, and with transcendental realities, I am not just talking about religion or God just. Indeed, our decisions are not always based on logical reason. We can act based on symbolic reason, poetic reason, narrative reason, experiential reason, and other. Let me offer you an example. If we see this thing and I ask you, what is this? You can answer, it is a ring. And I can say, obviously, sure, it's my married alliance. But imagine that I fly now to India and I lost it. When I go back to Spain, my wife notices this situation and she requires me, where is my ring? And I can express surprise by saying, I didn't notice it. My words make her more and more angry. First, because I have lost the ring, and second, because I wasn't aware of that. If I said, No problem, Anna. My wife calls Anna. No problem, Anna. Tomorrow I will buy another ring. And if I add, no, Anna, I will buy a better alliance. Those words wouldn't calm her anger. Actually, he would yell me, you have to go back to India to rescue it. And I can defend myself by saying that she is not being rational. And I repeat, that she is not being rational. However, the problem is not in her. The problem is on me, because I am mistaken. I am blind because she is acting not on a symbolic, on a rational reason, but she is acting on a symbolic reason. And here resides my problem. I am blind because she is acting on a symbolic reason. And second, I am considering that there is just one true kind of reason, that is the logical one. When she demands me to rescue my married alliance, is because it is more than just a golden ring. All symbols contains two parts. The metonymic one, I mean the material goal of the ring or the alliance understood as a piece of gold, and the metaphorical one, that is what the alliance means. For example, it involves a promise for a love forever, and it implies that if I lost the alliance, I am losing our loss. From this point of view, we can understand why my wife is so angry when first she found out that I lost my alliance, and second, when she discovered that I wasn't noticing it. The solution to that problem is not based on creating a logical dialogue with my wife, since the problem is based on a symbolic reason. Since the problem is based on a symbolic reason, we need a symbolic action to deal with this circumstance. That symbolic action is my travel back to India that she requested, or another symbolic action that shows that my love for her is so strong as the first day. A second limit of working with an analytical approach or with critical thinking is described by the Spanish philosopher José Ortega y Gasset. He asserts that the ideas and beliefs are very different because we have ideas, but we are our beliefs. I repeat, we have ideas, but we are our beliefs. According to this, ideas can be modified if we have new and good reason to do it. This is the basis of the work of critical thinking. And imagine, for example, that my counselor, Katerina, makes a new friend, Peter, in the hospital. Peter seems stable and a balanced person. Therefore, she concludes the idea that Peter is a good person. Despite this, when she goes back to home, her daughter explained that Peter was a serial killer, and Katerina read a newspaper with the history of Peter's previous acts. Based on that evidence and reason, Katerina changed her idea. Peter is not a good person for her now. The situation is different when we work with beliefs. When I tried to enlarge Katerina's position on meaning of lying, she rejected fiercely all my arguments. After proposing to read some books that defend her opposite point of view, she built more and more arguments to defend her belief, and she sentenced, all are wrong. They need to think more about it. Here we have a belief and not an idea. Ortega y Gasset, our philosopher, explained that we defend our belief because we are them. Therefore, if we die, we will die with those ideas. The problem with beliefs is that, the problem with beliefs is that they preclude our thinking skills, our skill of thinking, understanding, and even seeing in some occasion. Therefore, I propose experience and life experience to help counselors to change their beliefs, because critical thinking is not enough in some occasion. But what is a life experience? And here you have a description of that. A life experience is a situation that a person lives that transforms its whole existence. After having an experience, the feelings, ideas, beliefs, acts, behaviors ways of seeing life and people change. Some examples of experience are to give birth, to overcome a severe illness, for example, to be in an intensive care unit because of suffering COVID-19, and to overcome the situation despite doctors said that you are going to die. Another experience could be to get a position in a company or institution you have been fighting for getting during several decades. Or another life experience is to observe how our father or mother died because of a long cancer process and so on. Habitually, this life experience happened to us, and after that, we reshape our life. For example, these months marked by COVID-19, I have seen how some people close to death have abandoned their busy life, and how they have devoted their life to humanitarian activities, or how they have recreated new connection with their families. An experiential philosophical practice is based on proposing here. An experiential philosophical practice is based on proposing experiential exercises. The goal of the experiential consultation is to give the counselee the opportunity to put in contact with a different interpretation. As I said, beliefs are produced and changed by means of experience, and not just by means of conceptual dialogues, unless those dialogues were experiential ones. Katerina's problems was based on her rational dogmatism and her rational beliefs. Obviously, we can use critical thinking to develop an skeptical life. However, critical thinking can take us to the dogmatism to say that the only true and well-founded reason is a logic and discursive one. My role as philosophical counselor wasn't to convince Katerina that life has a purpose, but to help her to open her life to consider in an experiential way the possibility she rejects. Indeed, during some session, she has labeled as idiots to people that think that life has a purpose. She concurs with Freud, for example, and his idea of the religion as a drug for people. The problem was her inability to accept that another way of living and understanding life was possible. Our experiential exercise, in this case with Katerina, were, for example, to visit some NGOs, to talk to volunteers, to artists or people with a purpose in their life. And besides, we visited some graveyards to explore all the possibilities, answer to the question in an experiential way. Little by little, I discovered that experiences were not enough to bring about a transformation in people and to let them to get maxims that change their life. The same experiential exercise could be successful in a counseling and useless for another. Then I began to work on other concepts to resolve it. That is how the concept of experiential disposition, experiential scenarios, and experiential metaphors come about. And here you can read some of the experiential disposition. Bravery in the face of dangerous events, courage to cross thresholds that not allow a step back, patience, opening, accepting, commitment, preparing ourselves for subtlety, humility, withdrawal. So in an experiential philosophical consultation, we propose an exercise, but we are going to train in this disposition that I am not going to explain, but you can read here in my book, Experiential Philosophical Practice. However, I am going to talk about metaphors, another point of philosophical practice. Metaphors are frameworks where consultation and philosophical workshops are going to be developed. The main metaphor I have used in consultation and workshops are four. First of all, pilgrimage. Second, travel. Third, gardening. And fourth is training in a gym. These metaphors transmute the elements of consultation and workshops. For example, if we use the metaphor of a gym, here, the counselor becomes a philosophical trainer. The counselor is going to help the counselee to train philosophical abilities such as conceptualize, problematize, understanding, seeing in a phenomenological way, to move deep inside, to criticize assumption, and so on. The books and texts of philosophers that we are going to use in the consultation will be the dumbbells. The counselee becomes a philosophical sportman or sportwoman. Their goal is not to study philosophy, but to strengthen philosophical abilities such as govern his or her passion, to improve his communicative action, or the one that we can see in the history of philosophy. Furthermore, his success on the application of that, the success is the application of the theory and not to remember what means that theory. It is possible to talk about more elements that of the genes that can be understood from a philosophical point of view, such as muscle aches, fatigue in the session, state characterized for a desire to leave the training, to sport wear, registration payment, and so on. Training is a metaphor we use in our project, for example, carried out in Ibero-American prison, and there we require, for example, the attendants to wear something that remember that they are in a gym, in a philosophical gym, and even we make some philosophical exercise inside the philosophical session. Conclusion. To sum up, if our biography are built and enriched on experience, if a wise person is born from his or her experience, an experiential philosophical practice is more than to normalize counsels and to resolve problems. Philosophical practice is philosophia, I mean, to love wisdom. If we live experience, we can begin to road to wisdom. And if we don't achieve wisdom, don't worry. They live the life is far away from the malls where we are going to buy our favorite chocolates. Experience will help us, if we work with experiential philosophical practice, experience will help us to be more profound person or just person, because we have to remember that all our biography have been constructed by this, in some occasion, tricky experience. If we haven't lived, then probably our face will be similar to any one of the character, for example, of Game of Thrones, Modern Family, or any other character of Netflix. But if we will not fight to win our own face, if we don't have any experience, maybe we will giving many reasons to defend the fake life that my counselor Katerina has in 2016. Therefore, the idea is to help counselors to live those experiences, and in that sense, an experiential philosophical practice, and indeed an experiential philosophical counseling supports two Pittian maxims. First one, be what you know you are, and second one, be true to thyself now that thou hast learned what manner of man you art. That's it all. Thank you very much. And now I am open to your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barrientos-Rastrojo. That was a wonderful presentation. And through these case studies, we were able to get an insider's look into your subject matter. I will now invite all the speakers center stage, and we can have a question and answer round. I see Dr. Richard Charlton Seville has his hand raised.
Thank you for your presentation. I was just curious, does experiential philosophy have a definite or specific end goal?
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. Yes, the specific goal is to, first of all, to go to experience. Why I am saying this thing? Because in our world, we are losing our experience. I mean, the bureaucracy has making us that we don't feel life. We don't feel what is death. Max Scheler, for example, say this one. We don't have our death because we live our death in a hospital, but we don't feel, for example, our sentiments. There is a Italian philosopher, Mario Perniola, and he says that we don't have our own feelings. We are living our feeling by means of the things that other people say. For example, Richard, imagine that I put here a picture of a female that is looking by the mirror, how the rain, how it's raining in a Sunday. All of us is going to feel nostalgia or the same, but why all of us is feeling nostalgia? Probably because we are not constructing that feeling. Probably because that feeling has been constructed and all of us have lived that point. So first of all, experiential philosophical practice is a way to recover our experience. Second, is to have a more profound life, a more deep life, because we live in a superficial life. And in that sense, I think that it is very important that we have very profound ideas. But if we go to Heidegger or if we go to Husserl, we discover that the Weltanschauung, the how do you say it in English? The word of the line, the living word, we don't have that living word. So second is to have a more profound life in our thing. For me, it's not just to, as Jorge Diaz says, the importance is not to be happy, but it's to get a contact with the truth. But it is not just a cognitive truth; it's a profound truth that lead us to be more or less wise, a wise person. Even we are not going to be a wise person at any point, but it's to open the possibility to have the road of the wise person. It could be the third points that we are working in philosophical practice in prisons too.
Yes, Eleonora Candeli, doctor, please. You may unmute yourself.
Hello, everybody. I have two questions, if it's possible. One for Professor Barrientos-Rastrojo and one for Dr. Apostolides. Okay, so I start with Professor Barrientos. I'd like to know if there are situations in which consultants, even if they have an experience, don't change their beliefs, and why?
As I answer, or you want to make the question to Katerina, or
as you prefer?
Okay. For me, the first point is what means experience for you, because in my approach we have to difference between beliefs and ideas. To change beliefs is a work for critical thinking, so it's good. But my problem was, I think that your problem, when I have some counselors that said, my problem is that I know what I have to do, but how can I do it? And this is the reason because I work on a Spanish philosopher, but work in Italy a lot, that is Maria Zambrano. Maria Zambrano worked on poetic reason. And she tried, and it could be very interesting for you, she tried to develop a truth that make a transformation, not just in ideas, but make a transformation in the life. So I discovered that when people have a life experience, a very important experience, relevant experience in their life, they move away. For example, if I explain that it is important for a mother to keep a child and I give a lot of reason to them, maybe, as you said, Eleonora, maybe that woman is not going to understand and she's not going to change her mind. But after giving birth, a lot of women are going to say, I understand now what you trying to say to me, and her life changed. So what I am trying to do in consultation is that people live those experiences in prisons. That is the point. They can understand a lot of things, but the point is that they say the same that you are saying, Eleonora. The point is, how can I change my life? Because I feel that there is something that I cannot change. And for me, in some occasion, what we did was experiential exercise, some disposition. We train some disposition. I talk about it in experiential philosophical practice. I haven't talked about it. So we train in those disposition. We work with some metaphors, and we work with counselors, or in session for in the workshop we have a project, and we work with people for 7 months. It is not a question of 1 day or 2 days. And this is what I can say, to make exercises, to work with disposition, but mainly not to work just on ideas, but try to just on experience to make that transformation.
Okay, and so this is must be a kind of experience connected with the truth, as you said before. So that kind of experience, I mean, something very deep.
Yeah, but we have to recognize, Eleonora, that in some experience needs time. I mean, some people are not prepared to see the truth, or they don't want to see the truth. So experiential philosophical practice is not good for all the people, and even it's not good for all the times, because in some occasion you need some time to open yourself to that time. I talk in some occasion with the idea, and I'm going to finish, with the idea of a flower. You need time to be how a flower is opening. So you cannot pull the flower to open it. You have to give the time. This is a disposition. You have to give the time to a flower to open up in his proper time. And I think that this is important. So in some occasion, I have to say to the people, okay, let's stop here and come here after 3 months. Let's wait for 3 months, and we are going to wait for it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena.
And so for Dr. Apostolides, so first of all, thank you for sharing with us the 7 techniques, very clear and I think very helpful also. But I have an issue about the number 6, that is the fact of sharing experiences with the consultants. I mean, sharing my personal experience when I'm doing the counselor, we can say, could offer the client a sort of already set path, preventing him or her to find his or own way. In a certain sense, could it obstacle the myotical work?
Thank you for your question, Eleonora. And I'm not a doctor, but I'm glad that you called me by my last name, because otherwise we wouldn't know if you were referring to me or to Jose's patient. To your question about sharing experiences, what I would say is that, first of all, I think that of course, it goes without saying that when you share experiences, you should not dominate your session with a client by just talking about yourself. Obviously, the session centers on the client. But I actually think that the main reason that most of us avoid sharing our experiences is because we're actually afraid to reveal to a client the ways that we're fragile and the very human difficulties that we ourselves go through. So I think it's actually an exercise in modesty often to tell a client that this experience and this difficulty that you're going through is something that I know intimately in some way. And to your point, I think you're right that it should not be in the form of, and then I found this truth and I think you should find it, you know. And it takes some, self-awareness not to do that. So it's, helpful that you're bringing that up, because we should always be aware of having these boundaries. But I do think it's possible to share a client like what enabled you to overcome some difficulty if you were able to overcome it, but that should never be in the form of imposition, you know, at best suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, so it's not like I share with the experience with you because I have reached this kind of knowledge, but just because I've experienced the same situation that you are now experiencing.
Yes, and I think that counts for a lot just by itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rekha Navneet had a question, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I ask? All right. Good evening, everyone. This is addressed to Katerina. My question is that you said that the difference between, so to say, psychological counseling and philosophical counseling is that we reflect back the values to the counselee rather than reflecting back the content which the counselee has given us. So I was just wondering, and this also comes from the previous speaker's point on, again, differentiating between psychological counseling and philosophical counseling on the basis of deep listening, that probably deep listening is a little lesser in philosophical counseling. So I was just wondering, do the philosophical practitioners emphasize more on the cognitive empathy rather than just the effective one? Do they really segregate the two?
Thank you for your question. I think that the reflecting back values exercise is not, in the philosophical version, you're right, is not primarily about empathy. I think it achieves that because you're showing that you've understood them, and that already counts for a lot. But I think the main goal is to help them see what the problem they're describing in a slightly more philosophical way. So it restates the issue, but it highlights the values that are at play in this. So I think it assists in the growth of self-awareness, but there's always some level of empathy involved as well. I don't know if I would call that cognitive empathy, because I'm not sure what cognitive empathy is. There is some level of connection that happens for sure.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah. So can I just explain what I meant by cognitive empathy? What I was just saying was that we just try to generate an awareness in the other person. Are we saying that? Because if we are doing that, then then what happens if we also take back the content, or if we try to reflect back the content? Because even then we are trying to make the person as aware.
I'm not sure I've understood the question exactly. Is the question, how does reflecting back the content in a more philosophical way, how does that increase self-awareness?
Yeah, this is what, or simply that if we do not if we say that if we just follow what is done in psychological counseling, that we reflect back the content, but in addition, we also try and reflect back the value. But if we are going to segregate the two, in a sense that we are only going to reflect back on the content, on the values rather than the content, then I see it as a little difficult kind. It is as a little difficult thing to initiate awareness in the counseling. This is what my issue is. That for me, it is as if I'm trying to impose my value system on the counselee. So are we doing that?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I really think it's important not to impose your values. So which is why I think it's always good to end with a question, is that correct? Like, would you be comfortable restating what you've just said using these concepts? And the concepts are there in order to show that the practical problems one is facing is really the surface phenomenon that's hiding a more philosophical struggle that's in them. Reflective listening, as it's usually practiced in psychotherapy and conflict resolution, which is just word for word repeating what the other person has said, it really only achieves the empathy goal. Like, see, I've really understood what you've said. And there's something to be said for that, but I think that in philosophical counseling, we strive for something a bit more than that. And that something is, how can we take this to the next level of, wisdom seeking?
Yeah.
May I add something?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you, Dr. Navneet. I think Dr. Seville has a follow-up question, so we'll just quickly go back to him.
Thank you. So I had a comment and then a question, but the comment is a follow-up to what's been said already, and the question separate. So maybe I'll hold the question or I can ask it. So the comment was followed on from Eleonora's question to Katerina about shared experiences and whether sharing experiences could interrupt or obstruct the myotic process. And this dovetails a little bit with a statement that Luca made about philosophers should not be prophets. I've got a bit of an issue with how a lot of philosophical counseling seems to be narrowly Socratic, and as soon as we step out of that narrow Socratic realm, we start and we open ourselves to different roles that philosophers assume and advocate. We'd realize that there's a fair number of philosophers, from the Stoics to Kant, who advocate the moral exemplar. And then there's philosophical practitioners who accept and admit the moral exemplar is an important thing, whether it's the practitioner who assumes the position of the moral exemplar, or the moral exemplar is a discussion point that's up for grabs. So, but other roles that practitioners, or at least that philosophers advocate, would be the moral prophet. John Dewey advocated the moral prophet as being an integral part of social reconstruction. So I'm not quite sure why, and I get it if as philosophers we want to take a Socratic approach, that we mirror what Socrates does, but once we step outside of that, I think we start realizing that there's a range of different stances that we can take, and those stances don't necessarily require us to be so neutral and distanced. And so as soon as you start reconfiguring or rethinking about the role of the philosopher, you can see that the philosopher can be a fellow traveler. They can be a moral prophet. They can be a leader. They can share their life experiences in a way that actually facilitates growth for the participant, rather than skewing their development. So that was just a comment that I wanted to make around the role of the philosopher. And then the question was to Katerina, which is completely separate, which was, so you listed as being the founder of Eudaimon counseling. So I assume that your 7 techniques are the techniques that lead you to, or the participant to, a eudaimonic state. I'd like to know how you conceive of eudaimonia, and how it is that the techniques specifically get the participant there.
Thank you, Richard. May I also comment on your previous comment? I just want to say that it's true that some people look for gurus more than others, and to some level we can say whatever works for people. My personal view is that the counselor should not seek to be a moral exemplar, but it may nevertheless be the case that they are a moral exemplar without being conscious of it or intending it. Some of the counselors who have inspired me the most in my experience in the past were people who shared information about themselves, which was even compromising. But the very fact that they were willing to share it, to me, made me admire them. So it was in seeking to not be a moral exemplar that they actually made me admire them. Okay, now to your question. What is eudaimonia? To my mind, eudaimonia is a good relationship with your spirit. And for the ancient Greeks, it was the alternative to seeking happiness of a more transient type, where happiness depends on external circumstances. So eudaimonia is the idea that happiness is really a state of wellness with myself, a good relationship with myself. And the focus of these techniques is on helping people realize that the important thing is not an external threat that they may be facing, but the spirit they bring to that threat, to that danger, to that difficulty. And in maintaining wholeness and maintaining integrity, like Socrates did on his trial, you realize that in some way you're unafraid of these external things. I hope that's helpful.
Dr. Barrientos-Rastrojo, I think your hand is up.
Yes, I was thinking about what Richard said, and I am something that is between the academia and philosophical counseling. I started as philosophical counselor, but now I am counselor and I am a faculty member. And I think that what Richard said is very interesting in the sense that do we, or as Katerina has worked, do we, how can I say it? Do we are legitimized to give some moral advices to people, or do we need, or do we go to propose to people, to counselors, to reason by themselves? And in some occasion, in the history of philosophical counseling, for example, in Philo Café, there are some people that said, you cannot use text by Heidegger or by Descartes or the other. And other people said, no, you must to use them. And I think that it is very important because in some occasion, I think that it is very important to put examples with philosophical texts because those texts make that people think more deeply. So it is very important, but there is a risk. And the risk is that if some people read a lot of text by Heidegger or by Descartes, at the end they are going to transform in Heideggerian or Cartesian person, and this is the problem. Be careful with making that we turn in gurus. But philosophical texts for me are very interesting in order that people think more ideas than they didn't do. If you have studied philosophy, you know that after reading Aristotle or Plato, you have new ideas. But the important thing is that they are your own ideas, not the ideas of Plato or the like. So I think that it's very important, this discussion that Richard and Katerina was opening.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. I think that really brought it all together. And now I'd like to invite Professor Bala, who's the glue holding this conference together. So please, some remarks from you regarding the presentations.
No, I think Navneet has his hand up. Navneet, can you be brief? Please.
So just in response to Dr. Rekha's inquiry, what is cognitive empathy? This is a belief of others' belief. Like we study false belief, we do false belief test of the kids of 4-year-old, and if they pass it, then we believe they have passed a landmark in theory of mind. And it is contrasted with affective empathy, which is understanding of the emotional state of others. So we coined these concepts in connection with primates and infants' ability to understand social world around them.
Okay.
That was my reading.
Okay. Thank you.
That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Navneet. And thank you, friends, Katerina and Luca, Luis Miranda, and Jose. Why is it that everybody calls you Pepe?
Because in Spanish it's the same Jose and Pepe, so it's
okay.
the same. It's unfriendly Pepe.
Yeah, that's how I heard your name in some of the conferences. so
The
nice.
formal name is Jose, but it's more friendly Pepe.
Okay, great. Friends, it's truly like a very enlightening session. In fact, we have true representation of Europe here. Katerina is from Greece, and Pepe is from Spain, and Luca is from Italy, and Luis Miranda is from Sweden. So we have a diverse group coming together and trying to share their experiences of philosophical counseling from their own perspective and from the perspective of their countries, and also different domains. They deal with different domains. For example, Luca's presentation is with regard to the hospitals and the patients and their relations. And then Luis Miranda is working on spinal cord injured patients, right? So we have diverse kind of case studies that have come forward, and it's wonderful. In fact, I was just trying to relate what is happening, what has happened just now to what has happened yesterday in the discussions. I was looking at the conception. Basically, broadly, we are all focusing on philosophical counselor, right? So mostly the presentations are oriented towards philosophical counselor. What is he and what he should be or what he shouldn't be, right? This is the major concern that we have. In fact, yesterday's plenary session where Professor Lydia Amer started saying that philosopher has to be necessarily practitioner. Unless he is practicing, he cannot be a philosopher. And then we heard another interesting presentation by Rick, who said, if you're a philosopher, then you cannot be a practitioner, because being a philosopher, you would be focusing, committing to one perspective, and that is how you will not be open-minded, right? So you would be restricting yourself. And then now we have different dimensions. One saying that a philosopher should not be a prophet, right? Philosopher should not be need not be a moral exemplar, right? So different dimensions of how do we understand philosophical counselor or coming up in the discussions. And we all understand, we're all aware that restricting philosophical counselor to one tag, one label, is itself a very problematic and misplaced kind of one. We have to leave the philosophical counselor open to himself to the situation and to the client, rather than fixing him into one label and trying to say that he has to be this way. That's not possible, because it's always fluid kind of state in which he enters into a dialogue with the client, and that dialogue, co-creativity that Luis Miranda was talking about. The co-creativity is the one which makes whatever that would be the outcome. So it's not that we decide it and then we go further in the discussion. So that's one of the interesting things that has come. And also when Katerina and Pepe were responding, I felt that something that comes forward clearly is as a philosophical counselor, we should know the details of the method, but also we should also know more primarily the limitations of the methods that we use. We should be very clear about the limitations of the methods that we use. That's what I felt comes out very clearly in the discussions. So thank you so much to all four of you, Luca and Pepe and Katerina, Luis. Thanks for your participation and presentations. Yeah, over to you, Charu.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, a big thank you to all our panelists for taking out their valuable time and coming here to talk to all of us. This panel discussion has been streamed on YouTube as well, and will be uploaded there later on, so people can watch and rewatch and probably come back with more questions once they have time to really process because philosophical counseling in itself is a very new dimension for us as well here in India. And the wonderful part is that in this, plenary session, we got to listen to a lot of case studies. That is something that had come across yesterday in a lot of comments, that people were asking more about case studies from practitioners. So ask and it shall be given. You truly have provided. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again. On behalf of the entire organizing committee, I thank you all once again for being here.